Right, and we'll start now, shall we? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Open Research Week 2021, coming to you from bedrooms, kitchen tables, home offices from various parts of the UK and France. We've been surprised and delighted by the number of colleagues who have registered from over 60 UK universities, as well as universities from around the world and other organisations. Open Research Week will be officially opened by Professor Anthony Hollander, Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research and Impact here at the University of Liverpool. But first, a few housekeeping details. You are welcome to keep your camera on, but please mute yourself throughout the session. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat. Please feel free to put any questions there, and if time allows, we will ask some of the questions after the talk. This session is being recorded. The Open Research team is committed to providing a friendly, respectful and welcoming environment for all, and to ensure a harassment-free experience for everyone. We request that all participants be treated with dignity and respect. The session will run as follows. Professor Hollander will open the week and Open Research Week and introduce the keynote speaker, Dr. Rufus Pollock. After the keynote talk, the team will put questions posed to the chat to Rufus. If we need more elaboration or collaboration, we may ask the colleague who posed the question to unmute. The session is due to end at 11:30. So without further ado, I am delighted to welcome Professor Anthony Hollander to officially open Open Research Week 2021. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Judith. Good morning. It's my real pleasure to be here today to officially open Open Research Week 2021. This is the third year that the University of Liverpool and Liverpool John Moores University have collaborated on this event, and the first year that colleagues from Edge Hill University have also been involved, and you're most welcome too. The event has grown from a few talks to this year, 9 sessions being held over 3 days, covering, for example, open education, resources, responsible data practice, and the intersection between DORA, the Declaration of Research Assessment, and open research. The aim of Open Research Week is to promote open practices, to showcase what colleagues are already doing, and to provide a platform to discuss the many aspects of open research. This event also acts as a meeting point for those already involved in open practices, colleagues who have started to consider including open practices in their workflows, and those of you who are just keen to learn more at this point. However, supporting and developing open research practices needs more than a yearly showcase. We need a community. The team behind Open Research Week want to facilitate the creation of a community for those involved or interested in open research, which I hope is everyone here today and way beyond. The first open science community launched at University of Utrecht. There are now 13 in the Netherlands, a community in Sweden and also in Ireland. There's no better time to follow these early adopters and support our institutions and our researchers in creating our own open science community here in the Northwest. To do this, the team needs to reach out to colleagues who wish to be involved. Open science communities have already shown that they can support not only researchers, but institutions in shaping policies and adopting new workflows. After each session this week, the team will be asking colleagues to register their interest in becoming involved. At this stage, it will be an informal opportunity to learn more about setting up such a community. So, this is a request for colleagues from the University of Liverpool, Liverpool John Moores University and Edge Hill University, specifically all of you to get in touch. To those of you from other institutions or organisations across the rest of the UK or further afield, and we know there are people here from other countries, we'd encourage you to have similar conversations in your local regions and start spreading the word, if you will. 2020 has highlighted the real importance of open and transparent research in effectively addressing worldwide issues, not least in the rollout of vaccine research. Collaboration and sharing can facilitate problem solving quickly and on a large scale, and this is needed now more than ever. So I'm really delighted that Dr. Rufus Pollock has agreed to deliver our first keynote talk for this year's Open Research Week. Rufus is a researcher, technologist, and entrepreneur, a pioneer of the open data movement. He founded the Open Knowledge Foundation in 2004. One of the many things the Open Knowledge Foundation has done is build CCAN, open source open data portal for the storage and distribution of open data used by the UK government and many others. The portal has facilitated the publication of over 1 million data sets. That's CKAN if you want to look it up. It's a really good site. Rufus advises national governments, international organizations, and also industry. His latest book, The Open Revolution, Rewriting the Rules of the Information Age, has been described as an urgent and provocative book, highlighting the choice that has to be made between making information open and shared or closed, exclusively owned and controlled, and how a closed digital economy is the source of major problems. It's a book that seems even more relevant today than when it was first published in 2018. So, welcome Rufus to ORW 2021. Thank you so much for agreeing to open this week with your keynote talk, The Open Revolution, Making a Radically Fairer and Free Future. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've unmuted. Thank you. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone who's joined the call. Really a very warm welcome. And it's a privilege to get to talk to you in these unusual and interesting times in this form. So I'm going to start with the I want my preview. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. We'll go in and out on that one. So I want to talk, as I say, a radically fair and freer future, but also the kind of what's also the dystopian opposite of that, the robot revolution for the 1%. And this talk is going to about how basically we've been using old rules in a new world and how we can change that and how we need to change that, and how in particular going open is central to a fairer and freer future for all. And I want to first of all mention that the book, if you're interested, this kind of talk is going to some extent be a summary or a distillation of the book, The Open Revolution, which, given its name, is freely and openly available. You can also buy it from a bookstore or whatever, but you can also download it for free from the website openrevolution.net. And you're very welcome to do that and share it with people. Please share this book. I once thought about calling it, this should be called like, Please Steal This Book or something like that, as per the famous Yippie book from the 70s. But it's The Open Revolution. So I want to start with what I mean, and I'm going to come back to this. So at the beginning, this may seem a mouthful, but I want to put it in your mind right at the start, which is, what do we mean by an open revolution? So an open revolution means we would move into a world where all non-personal information, that's all software, all research, all medicines, all content, all data, that's not personal. So we're not talking here about your WhatsApp pictures. We're not talking about your personal photos, your emails, but all information that wasn't personal would be open, free for anyone to use, build on, and share. And this is crucial, innovators and creators are recognized and rewarded. Okay, so that's the open revolution would be moving into this world. And I'll come back to the detail of that, but crudely, public funding of research would continue and replace copyrights and patents with remuneration rights, which I'll describe. But I want to start, we are often, I think open is testament to this call. I mean, when I first started, we started work on openness 16, 17 years ago, I don't think there would have been, it's a real privilege to have, I don't know, over 100 people on this call. It's just amazing. And it's a real sign of how this issue is growing in awareness and in importance, especially in the age of COVID. And I still, you know, in general, I don't know if you've ever had, if you're into like open research or open science or open data, but, you know, like I always think of my mother. My mother's amazing. My mother's just this incredible person. She's in her 70s, still incredibly active, doing like 2 jobs and running a farm and other things. But if I tried to explain what I was doing, my mother was often kind of, how's this, you know, like, you know, it sounds kind of like, you know, it's kind of sort of obscure or specialist. And I think what people don't realize at the moment is that this issue is central to almost to every person on this planet. It's really, it kind of has a very direct relevance, but it's one that's kind of a little bit invisible to us at the moment. So in this talk, I want to start at least by looking at the really big picture and the big impacts of our current closed model. And I want to start with a story about Mr. Frisbee and the American dream. I want to talk about, and I think to talk to you about the hidden cause of growing inequality in particular. And this story, so Mr. Frisbee is a real person despite his wonderful name, and he was born in 1963 in Florida. And when he was 15 years old, he left school and he went to work in an agricultural machinery business just south of Tampa. And he worked there for the next 30 years. And then one day he took the savings he'd made and he opened his own business, which was a scrapyard and metalworking business. And it was called American Dream Welding and Fabrication. And this is just the most incredible name because his life and what he's doing it's a perfect symbol of that. Because during his lifetime, the American dream is breaking apart. The world he grew up in, the jobs he grew up in, the blue-collar industrial sector are all disappearing in the United States. So when the recession comes in 2009, he is really struggling. He goes from 6 employees to just 2, him and his stepson. His partner, who works at a daycare center, gets fired, and he starts to get angry. He starts to resent other people's success. Why are they doing okay when I'm having such a difficult time? Because his world is not working. And then we come to 2016. He's angry, he's dispossessed, the government are making him put up some stupid fence around his business, and he's someone who's going to vote for Donald Trump. He's going to vote at least for someone who's giving him some kind of answer, however true or not it is. And it's worth remarking, even if Trump lost the last election, that almost, you know, at least half of those who voted, almost, not quite, voted for Donald Trump still, despite things. So, I mean, I'm not opining here actually one way or the other on Donald Trump, but I think for many people, it was kind of a surprise, certainly, that he got elected in 2016. And it was perhaps surprising how close the election was. And I think that the shift or the underlying dynamics that Trump represents are still very much with us. And what I want to look at Mr. Frisbee is that he may be one man, but he epitomizes the growing inequality of the United States. He represents millions. Specifically, the bottom 60% of Americans, that's 180 million people, have barely seen their real incomes rise since 1970. They have roughly the same wage today they had 50 years ago. And even more dramatically, the same 60% of Americans in 2015 were actually poorer than they were in 1999. Over the previous 16 years, they'd actually got poorer in real terms. And that has never happened in the history of the United States, that a majority of the population has got poorer. And meanwhile, the share of the richest people, the top 1%, the top 5%, have risen dramatically. And that's what makes it so tough for people like Mr. Frisbee. Because if everyone were having a hard time, you could understand. But when you watch a few people at the top getting richer and richer and you're struggling, then you get angry. And the thing is, I also want to emphasize that this is not just the blue collar workers. This isn't just people who worked in steel factories and that Bruce Springsteen sings about. This is people in the middle classes who are really struggling, who worry about their job security, worry if their job will get outsourced offshore or be replaced by AI, and whether they'll still be needed. And there's this direct connection between that growing inequality and the political instability we're seeing. Right? This isn't just about the US. This inequality is happening all over the world right now. I mean, just to emphasize, I think this is income inequality. This is the famous, it's actually from Piketty et al., capitalism in the 21st century, and his work. I actually think that Piketty is largely wrong about his diagnosis about what's driving inequality, and that's why I'm going to set that in this talk. But his empirical work is extraordinary, and obviously his points are. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend. But what you can see is that inequality was falling in the United States and in Europe. And actually, I mean, we have data for a lot of the rest of the world for quite a lot of the 20th century, but it started rising about 1970. There's this growing gap between rich and poor. And what I want to emphasize is this is systemic. This is not just happening in the United States. This is happening in China. It's happening in Europe. It's happening really all over the world, that there's this rising inequality. And what I want to also point out is there is a direct connection between that and the rise of populism. You know, the people who would vote for someone who is a populist are people who are becoming the dispossessed, who are insecure, who are worried, who are angry, who see opportunity diminishing. And, you know, for example, there's a lot of data on this now. Over a majority of people in many countries now think that they or their children will be less well off or less well than their parents. So I want to, there's something systematic here, and it's something that's hidden from us at the moment. We're missing the real source of this at the present. And today we're going to discover that hidden source together. And what we will see is that there is a direct connection between the rise of digital technology and this growing inequality. This may sound surprising. After all, digital technology has brought incredible innovation and progress. I couldn't be on this call with you today. We couldn't be having this meeting without digital technology. So I'm a big fan of digital technology in many ways. And I want to emphasize that it isn't digital technology on its own that's causing growing inequality. Rather, it is the combination of digital technology's costless copying with the mistaken and inappropriate use of old rules of exclusive ownership in the forms of patent and copyright that is causing growing inequality, political instability. And I just want you to really think about that for a moment. So to think about this, I sometimes want you to think of a very simple analogy, which is, if you think there's something called like nitrogen, like I don't know if people hear, but you know, nitrogen is a fertilizer, right? It's good for the ground. It's what, you know, nitrogen is what fertilizes fields, what makes the grass and the corn grow. But if you combine nitrogen with the right kind of other stuff, you can make a bomb. You can make something explosive. So it's the combination of two otherwise possibly this costless copying with these exclusive rules that creates this explosive thing. And to understand that, we need to step back. And in doing this, we're also going to see something. You're going to really understand the basic fundamental dynamics of the digital age, which often, by the way, we don't notice. We're so bowled over by all the things going on because the digital world is so, you know, so fast moving, so many things are changing. But the actual essence of it is very simple about what's happening and what's going on. So I want to look at together what's different about digital. So there's a profound and simple shift. So I first of all want you just to think for one moment. Maybe people can say in the chat if they want. I haven't been as fancy as to set up a poll here, but I would want to ask, which of these is the odd one out? So what you've got is a banana, you've got what's supposed to represent a movie, and you've got a medicine, a pill. Which of these is the odd one out in your view? And I'm just going to give people 30 seconds, so you can just, I know, you know, just write in the chat if you want, or whatever. What do you think is the, you know, put banana or movie or pill if you think which is the odd one out? And I'm going to give people just 10 seconds to do that. So make a quick decision. Great. Okay. So lots of people are writing. That's fantastic. So let's give you one more moment. So what I would say here, the odd one out is the banana. Now, the why I'm saying that is because the essence, that the major component, at least in value, of the movie and the medicine are information. I especially put the medicine in because the medicine even has a physical form, right? A medicine is, an actual physical pill, but the real essence of a medicine, the real value of it, the real cost of creating it is in the information. Whereas the banana obviously has information, you might say in the DNA or something like that, but it's essentially made of the main thing in it is atoms, it's a physical thing, whereas the other two are sort of informational things. And what way though is this different? What's different? Why does that matter? I mean, that's a difference, but why does that difference matter? Well, let's just ask ourselves for a moment what it would cost to make one of these, roughly. And of course, the numbers could be radically different. Maybe it's 10 million for the medicine, maybe it's $1 million for the movie. But the basic point is maybe a banana is 50 cents. The basic point is that's what it costs to have one banana, to have one movie, to have one instance of the medicine. Then the question would be asked, what does it cost to make the next? So imagine I've got my one banana, I've got my movie, I've got my medicine. I want to make another kind of, not a different movie, but the same movie. I want another copy of it. I want another copy of the banana. How much would that cost? And the answer would be, it basically costs the same to make a banana again. But to make the next movie just costs the cost of copying it and sending the bits over the internet. It's about a cent maybe. And maybe for the medicine, it's about only €1 or something like that to actually make it in the factory. And so the thing you want to understand is the ratios. So for normal things made of atoms, the cost of a new copy is the same as making the first. It's about one to one. When it comes to the movie, it's about 1 billion to 1, or maybe 100 billion to 1. I mean, at some point you'd almost say it's costless. The cost of the copy is almost zero, approximately, to the cost of making the first copy. And this is the most profound change in the nature of production, in the nature of what we create and interact with in our economy in the history of humanity. And I just want to emphasize something about this, which when I do this often at events, I often ask people, what's the biggest difference about the digital age? This is not normally the immediate answer I get. Not everyone, I would say very few people normally put up their hand and say, the most biggest difference is costless copying. I'll say something like it's faster, or those things. And those things are often right, but they're not the fundamental change that's really relevant to understanding a lot of the dynamics of what's happening. So I call it costless copying. Economists call it non-rivalry. And the simplest way I often think about it is movies or photos or software are different from shoes. So if you and I try and wear my shoes at the same time, it will be a really messy situation, right? We can't wear the same pair of shoes at the same time. If we both try and go 2 different places in my car at the same time, there's going to be it's not going to happen, right? The car isn't going to magically split in 2, but I can send you my photos with a click of a button. I still have them. I mean, and really to get how unusual this is for us, we take it for granted. But I have a nephew who's about 6 years old, and he was using his mom's phone, and he was like, Mom, if I send the photos that we took yesterday to Dad, are we going to lose them? Like that's very natural. If I send the photos on the phone to somebody else, I won't have them anymore. That's what we grow up in. As the smallest children, we live in a world of atoms, not of bits. We live in a world where sharing means less, where we we can't copy things costlessly. And so movies are different from shoes in this fundamental way. And in particular, what's happening right now in our world is we're moving from a world that we have lived in a way, or an economy, you might say, we've lived in for thousands of years. And when I say economy, I mean that broadly. I mean it just in the sense that humans have found food and made things for millions or thousands of years. That was a world of atoms. And we are in now we're moving into a world of bits. Just to be clear, we'll keep living in a world of atoms. Atoms. I'm sitting at a table, my laptop, but the majority of those things, the value, the cost of creating them, the energy and effort will go into producing the information. Even look around you at physical things now. Like even the chair you might be sitting in, actually the majority of the value or the effort that went into it would have been the design, and the manufacturing becomes limited. My mother, I said, is a farmer. More and more of the things on the farm actually have information baked into them, whether it's the medicines for the sheep, whether it's the tractor, whether it's whether it's her smartphone. And bits are free to copy. So this is the fundamental two changes that are going on. We're moving into an information age thanks to digital technology. It's actually an information age, not a digital age. Digital is just the vehicle. Digital is just the technology. What we're really in is an age of information. And bits are free to copy, whereas atoms are expensive. And this changes everything. And I want to just give an analogy then what you can do. Once you have this basic insight, this basic understanding, you want to think of the implications. And I kind of make a joke here, the plate tectonics. I don't know if most people here are familiar with tectonic theory. I got taught a bit of it in school, but it's that there are these plates, right? That for a long time, there was this kind of sudden insight, like, it looks like South America could fit together with Africa, or, and different, doesn't it look like, certain things fitted into each other? And when you have plate tectonics, it's a very simple insight that there are these plates that are moving around underneath the kind of surface of the earth and banging into each other. But it gives you a pattern that is very powerful. Suddenly, where all the volcanoes are and all the earthquakes happen, you can predict where they happen, and you can understand why they happen where they happen. Now, you can't say when they will happen, and this is important. So similarly, I can predict to you certain major things that are going to happen or are happening. I don't actually know when the explosion will happen. So take the rise of populism with Trump. I'm now going to show you how costless copying is going to lead into rising inequality, and rising inequality, when it's untreated, there's a lot of evidence from history, is going to lead to political instability and conflict, and possibly actually, revolution in the kind of political revolution kind. But it's certainly going to lead to that. I can predict other things. Now, when that will actually happen, I don't know, because that's the randomness of life. But it's like when the volcano actually explodes will depend on a bunch of factors. But I can predict where volcanoes will happen. I can predict the buildup of tension, even if I don't know when it will get released. And I want to start with the law of one. So I want to go back to Mr. Frisbee temporarily. So we talked about his lifetime declining, coinciding the decline of traditional university. I just want to look at the coincidence for a moment, which if you look there, and I showed you that inequality graph, it all starts rising in the 1970s. Now, there might be various reasons about that. There's also change in tax policy. But I just want you to note that 1968, when Mr. Frisbee's 5 years old, Intel is founded in Silicon Valley. When he is 12, in 1975, Bill Gates will drop out of Harvard to found Microsoft. And in the following year, Jobs and Wozniak will found Apple Computer in a garage in Silicon Valley. Oracle will get founded about the next year. Now, we might say this is just coincidence. I mean, there's always been change, right? Horses replaced motor cars. People who had horse businesses went out of business. In a market economy, there's always change, and there's always some people who are losing out and some who are gaining. But there's something different now, because when Mr. Frisbee's job goes, he's replaced not by somebody else, but by a robot, crudely put. Now, what's different about that? Because after all, people do make robots. As I said, there's something fundamentally different. And I want you to think now about the implications of costless copying in a bit of detail. So I want to imagine for a moment that, I want you to imagine that in the old economy, we're apple farmers. Now, there are some apple farmers who are better and some who are worse. I'm just going to imagine for a moment, say it's like Judith and me, and maybe some of you. Can you imagine we're all apple farmers and we're producing apples? And some of us are really good at growing apples, and some of us are not so good, and some of us are okay. But everyone who does a reasonable job of growing apples will be able to sell their apples and make a living in general. Or let's say we worked in a car factory and we made cars. Yes, there are some workers who are faster than other workers, and there's some who are less fast. But if you do a decent job, you'll earn a living. And it's also true if you're an owner of a car factory. Yes, there are other car factories competing with you, but if you do a decent job, you'll sell your cars. And that will give you a decent free market system working right there. There'll be competition. If you're really lazy or bad, you'll go out of business. And if you're good, you'll prosper. But in general, people will make a living. But then something happened. We got a shift to an economy where it's as if there's a race with just one winner. And that's related to costless copying. And let me go back to the apple farmer analogy. So imagine we're all apple farmers, and then one day there's an apple farmer in our community called Mr. Gates. And one night, a witch comes to Mr. Gates's door. And she says, "Mr. Gates, if you will give me 10 gold coins, I will give you a magical apple seed." And Mr. Gates thinks about it a bit. He goes and talks to his wife. 10 gold coins is quite a bit of money, but he decides he's going to go for it. He gives her the money. He takes the apple seed. He plants it in the backyard that night. And guess what? The next day, there is a magical new apple tree outside his house. And what is extraordinary about it is it will produce unlimited apples. You can keep picking, you can keep just infinite apples are produced. Now, what's going to happen? And at no cost to him, suddenly Mr. Gates can supply everyone with apples that cost him nothing. He can sell at a price that is less than anyone else, if necessary. I mean, because they cost him nothing to make. So suddenly he dominates the entire apple market, and everyone else is going to go out of business, or certainly have a lot less business. And that's what's going on. The real world Mr. Gates, once he has the Windows operating system, he dominates. He can supply everyone in the world, and it costs him nothing to make each new copy. So he can dominate that market. And that's what we're seeing. If you look in, let's say, software, or we can look at other industries that are information-based, particularly it's most extreme in ones which are purely information-based, like software. You basically have one or very few, the law of one. Look at Facebook, you look at Google, you look at Microsoft with Windows, you even look at specific areas, like how many word processing programs there are, or how many chat apps are there. There's normally a very few that are actually making it. Maybe normally one. And every vertical you look at, you have monopoly or close to it. And so that's what we want to see is that, and I want to emphasize one thing about that before I kind of come back, which is there's something important to add to that story that's kind of missed when you talk about apple tree. Because in an apple world, in the physical world, it's just natural and obvious for us to have exclusive ownership. Imagine we went back to the Stone Age and I've got my axe, my stone axe, and someone, Ugh, the great other, my rival in the community takes my axe. I'd be like, Ugh, you've taken my axe, right? It would just be automatic. Or if you see small children playing, they have a very clear sense of mine, even without, I haven't taught them any property law yet. I haven't taught them any legal theory, but they're very clear that like, this is mine and someone's taken it, it's kind of because of the rivalry, because only one person can wear the shoes at one time. There's this sort of natural ownership that we have, and which we may formalize it into legal rules and quite complicated legal rules about property ownership, but its kind of basis is in the physical fact. So this social rule that we created, namely ownership, ownership of property, kind of is related to this physical fact, which is only one person can use the property at one time, the thing at one time. But when you look at the apple tree, it's not so obvious, because it's what in that story, it's kind of just natural that Mr. Gates, he planted the apple tree, it's his apple tree, so he can control who has access to the apples. But that's just something we want to bring out. Mr. Gates has exclusive control and ownership of his magical apple tree. And that's the same as Mr. Gates in real life having exclusive ownership and control roughly of Windows, that you can't make copies of Windows without his permission or without Microsoft's permission. Because we could have a story where Mr. Gates' apple tree was shared with everyone. we could imagine that the village had all got together and paid to buy the seed from the witch and planted the apple tree, and then everyone had apples. But we haven't done that. We create rules that give people exclusive ownership and control. And there is a logic to that. It costs money to make that apple tree. We all know it costs money to make Windows or make a movie. Maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. So as a society thought, okay, we've got to have a way for innovators and creators to make their money back. And so what we've done is create these monopoly rights like copyright and patents that give someone exclusive monopoly control of these pieces of software, these movies, and these databases. But there is this massive unintended side effect. Because that law of one, and it could be there was one apple tree. Once we have an infinite apple producing apple tree, we don't need lots of other apple trees. We might have only had one apple tree, but there's something that turns it into monopoly. So this is the next point to get, is costless copying. Once you add your bicarbonate soda, as it were, once you bake it together with exclusive rights, with monopoly rights, with patented copyright, you get a very explosive mixture, which is monopoly and inequality. Now, you might be sitting here and saying, hey, that's not great. I don't like the fact that, Facebook has this monopoly. And it's not just about money, by the way. I'm not going to go on about it in this talk, but it's not just about inequality, but inequality is something that affects everyone in our society. People who don't give a monkeys about, the digital world or whatever, it's affecting them. But also this affects freedom of innovation. It affects freedom of thought. Facebook control what you post. You don't have there's no real freedom of choice anymore. So on. I could go on at some length, but I want to just emphasize at the same time, I could say all of this and you'd be like, well, Rufus, that's not great, but it's better than not having the magical apple tree at all. Because if you're coming along and saying, let's just hey, you sound like one of those hippies. Let's just make everything free, man. Let's just give everything out for open and free. And the issue with that is there'll be no one to pay for the witch in the first place. It costs money to come up with new COVID vaccines. It costs money to come up with new software. It costs money to write new books or to make movies. How are we going to pay for that first copy? So you have to have an answer to this question. Now, one answer, obviously, to some extent in research, which is why it should be a bit of a slam dunk, is we as a society are often already paying for most research. We have got together through public funding as taxpayers and paid for there to be universities and there to be researchers and to have research produced, mostly. But I want to focus, that one is a bit easy. I mean, even if it's kind of crazy what goes on to some extent in with journal publication and so on, in general, that's a slam dunk as an argument. But what about things that are like Microsoft or Facebook? They had to spend money developing their Facebook platform. How are we going to pay for the innovation to come up with the software, to come up with the algorithms, to come up with the movies? Who's going to pay for Game of Thrones to get made? Game of Thrones costs, I think, millions of dollars an episode or something like that to make. So you need a solution. I'm going to go through this quite quickly today, and you can read more. I'm going to talk about the example of medicines, and I'm going to talk about remuneration rights. And remuneration rights are expressly designed to look a little bit like a patent or a copyright, but to be compatible with openness. And I'm just going to walk through kind of quickly in medicines. So to think of the example of medicine, when you buy a pill, you actually are paying for two things. You're paying for the information and you're paying for the manufacturer. And I just want to clarify that. And one is expensive and one is cheap. So as I said, making the medicine, now the medicine part is atoms. Actually fabricating the medicine in a factory is an atoms part. That we have to pay for in the normal way. But what about the information part? And the thing to understand is currently when medicines are very expensive, including maybe COVID vaccines or anything else, the actual manufacturing cost, it might not be always 1%, it might be 5% or 10% or 0.1%, but it's very low relative to the cost of doing the research and development. And so is there a way that we could pay for these two things separately, basically? Could we pay for the R&D and the manufacture separately? And if you want to read more, there's a project called imedproject.org, which has this in quite a lot more detail that you can read out. But I also call it Spotify for like Spotify for pharmaceuticals, because what you're going to look at is like an all-you-can-eat type model. So it's similar to what happened in music. So we went from a world where we bought each track individually, like at 99 cents a track, to a world where we pay a fixed fee, a bit like paying a tax or subscription. You pay Spotify £9.99 a month or whatever. And then you can have as much music as you want. So we're going to create two payment streams, and one is for the R&D and one is for the manufacturer. And I want to focus on the R&D payment stream because this is the one that's replacing patents, basically. So what's going to happen is we're going to create a remuneration rights fund. And each of us, let's say we're in England or you're in France or whatever country, the NHS, let's say we're in England, the NHS would take the budget it's currently spending on pharmaceuticals each year, and it would say, okay, let's say 99% of this is actually for R&D, for like researching, it's for the patent side, for the actual information. We're going to put that money in this fund. So the NHS is going to fund this budget every year. I don't know what the number would be, but it'd probably be like billions. Like I've checked the numbers recently, but it's kind of going to be probably billions, maybe 20, maybe 10 billion or something like that. And from our healthcare insurance or from the government healthcare into this remuneration rights fund. And then a pharmaceutical company, when it invents a new thing, like a new vaccine for COVID or a new drug for cancer or a new treatment, they go to the remuneration rights fund, they get something like a patent, they get a remuneration right that says, we invented this. And it entitles them to get paid from the remuneration rights fund. So in particular, every year we would, as an independent regulator, and we already have this regulator, by the way, there's already an authority in England or other countries that assesses the effectiveness of medicines before they get approved for use. You would check every year how much the medicine was used and roughly how many life years it saved. How effective was it? How valuable was it? And then you would divide up the fund based on how each give out the money to each drug based on the proportion of health benefits it generated. So let's say, just for a simple example, say a billion human life years were saved last year by all the drugs that had remuneration rights. And I don't know, Judith's drug, which is for COVID, saved, 100 million of those life years. And I have a cancer drug that only did 10 million life years. So Judith would get paid 10% of the fund. She would be given, if let's say there's 10 billion pounds in the fund, she would be given £1 billion. The beauty of this, though, is that meanwhile, and this would be done by a transparent algorithm, it would be, overseen. So it wouldn't be run by the government in the sense the government would make sure money went into the fund, but it would be run by an independent regulator. But what's really beneficial is then you could have open access to the recipe. You don't have a patent anymore. You don't have a monopoly right. You don't have medicines that cost $100,000 per treatment. You can manufacture the vaccine or the cancer drug. Anyone can manufacture it because you're paying the innovator directly from the remuneration rights fund. So then the cost, anyone can manufacture that R&D. Anyone can build on it. Anyone can, do research with it. There are no restrictions on that. And so the cost of the cost of the medicine for actually per use is simply the cost of manufacturing, which is like a generic. And you can think of the same thing, I call it open Spotify. I mean, Spotify is already doing part of this in the sense you pay once and then you have unlimited access. The only issue is that Spotify are another monopoly in the middle. What you really want is something like the government saying everyone's going to pay £0.50 or £1 every month on their phone bill. And then there's unlimited access to music in the United Kingdom or in France or in Europe or in the United States. If everyone pays their fixed fee per month, there's unlimited music access. So I'm just going to wrap up now. So to reiterate, the open revolution, one is to recap, which is, on this point, we want to do this and do this model, continue public funding for research and switch the monopoly rights model we've got into, the exclusive rights model, to a remuneration rights model, which is compatible with open and pays innovators and creators. And we want to do this for research, for software, for medicines, for content. When I say in research, not just for the research itself, but maybe for the platforms that help us find research, which is kind of what journals were supposed to be, I guess. But we can do this in all kinds of areas. And so to conclude, once you understand the basic pattern, by the way, you can explain a lot of things that are going on, irrespective of even the open revolution. Once you get the digital is different and that bits are costless to copy, you then get the law of one and the end of traditional competition. And when you combine it with exclusive rights, you get monopoly. And once you have monopoly, you get inequality and you get stunted innovation. I would also suggest, by the way, one of the things that people are debating, I don't know if you're aware about it, but growth, I'm not necessarily a fan of growth per se, but if you're interested in our societies innovating and growing, kind of coming up with new ideas, we seem to, even though we've had the information revolution, we don't seem to be innovating as fast. And I'd like you just for a moment to compare the internet with Facebook. They're both networks. They're both basically algorithms at their essence. The essence of the internet was an algorithm with TCP/IP, ways of sending bits around between computers. The essence of Facebook is basically a database and friend connections and a content stream. You know, like the essence of Facebook is not that complicated as an algorithm. You could have had an open Facebook, just like we had an open internet. We could have had an open social network. Now, I would just invite you to think of the innovation that happened on top of the internet when it really took off in the 90s, within its first decade. It was enormous. Amazon got built, Google got built, all of these companies, all of this innovation. What's got built on top of Facebook? Farmville. I mean, you know, basically, like the main benefit of Facebook is simply that it's like a postal system. It's, you know, social networks are really useful, like a phone system's useful. But the level of innovation, it was like what got built on top of the phone system when it was controlled by AT&T or your local monopolist, and they controlled what you could do with it. I mean, I don't know if you know, but AT&T in the United States spent about 40 years trying to stop the internet, basically insisting that only AT&T would get to determine what you plugged onto the end of your phone line. And that's the same as Facebook today. I don't know if you've read the antitrust suit that just came out. It's about 90 pages long and it's great. And it documents example after example of Facebook killing off companies that would wanted to connect to Facebook that they thought would compete with them in some way. And they would literally just like forbid access. They'd be like, that breaks our terms and conditions. If you read Facebook's terms and conditions, it actually says you cannot build applications that connect to Facebook that would compete with Facebook. They like literally write that in their terms and conditions. And they're intelligent, because if they don't do that, one day they will be overthrown. Someone else will come along and build a better Facebook. I mean, that's the one thing you got to remember about poor old monopolists. If you're ever feeling sorry for Mark Zuckerberg, you've got to remember that he lives a very stressful life, that as a monopolist, you always are living in fear that another monopolist will come along and overthrow you. So at the end of this, we have the most profound choice in our economic setup, other than dealing with climate change, of the 21st century, which is open or closed. Do we choose the open route of remuneration rights, of sharing, of freedom to innovate, freedom of enterprise, freedom of choice, freedom of thought, or do we choose the closed route, which gives us stagnation, instability, and monopoly? And finally, we do need a credible way to pay for the magical apple tree. Otherwise, we sound a bit like, I don't mean in a pejorative way, I love hippies, but you know, like that criticism of hippies of like, oh, it all sounds good, man. All you need is love. Well, actually, you need to eat as well. You know, like you need a really credible answer for how we're going to pay for and fund innovation. And we have that with remunerations wise. And we have like Spotify. We have examples. It might not be a perfect example, by the way, as I've emphasized, still monopoly in the middle in various ways, but we have this happening. Or take another example. Australia, a few years ago, there's a drug for hepatitis C that was just a complete blockbuster. And the Australian government basically did a deal where they paid like something like $1 billion to the drug company. And then they could have unlimited kind of doses. So this stuff is happening. So I want to end by saying the open revolution is not here yet, but it's coming. And please come on board. You can make a massive difference when you go share these ideas, when you go advocate for it, when you go explain to people how digital is different, and have people just go that light bulb moment of, oh yeah, I can't click my fingers and have 1 million Ferraris, but I can click my fingers and have 1 million YouTube downloads. Something opens in people's minds. So I really invite you, like, this is something we can make happen within the next decade, within the next few decades, like, and it will be transformative for our societies and our economies. So please go and download this book, have a read, share the book, tell people about it, tell people about these ideas. And I finally want to end by this revolution is made of other people. Like, there's so many people I would like to credit in this call, so many people who've inspired me, so many people whose shoulders I've stood on, and you're the ones who are the ones to take this forward. So I really emphasize there is so much opportunity for leadership in this area to make a transformative difference. And you can really feel the shift coming. You know, you can feel it in the antitrust suits. You know, there is a hunger for a better way, and we have something to offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to unshare your screen, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rufus. That was a very interesting talk. And I'm even pleased that you managed to have a Bruce Springsteen reference as well. So that's great. We do have some questions here. Let me just have a look. So the first question is from Jahinga Makal. He says, so innovators have to wait until the results are out to get his remuneration or her remuneration. Will it discourage them?
So just that's a great question. I mean, just to think, that's true today of a patent. If I come up with a new cancer drug, I don't get any money, I don't get any direct income until my drug is like approved and on the market and being used. Similarly, I can write a song, but until someone listens to it and downloads it or pays for it, I don't get any income. Now, what I want to emphasize though, is knowing that you had got a remuneration right, just like a patent, I could raise money from venture capitalists to continue doing my work. So I could say, look, I've got this amazing new piece of software, or I've got this amazing new algorithm, or I've got this amazing new drug formula. Please give me money to keep developing it, you know, or to do the work to get it to a better form, because I've got the remuneration right. So if it works out, I'll get paid. And I think this is something I want to emphasize, which is sort of great about market, well, at least I know what you want to call it, capitalism, or about markets and about risk taking, which is you don't need the government to decide. You can have all the things that you like about like free market capitalism, which is venture capitalists or other people who invest in ideas before they succeed and provide the capital, the risk capital to try things out. So yes, an innovator has to wait until they get their product is being used, but that's true today. You know, so yeah. I hope that answers your question, and please type more, Jahangir, or unmute or something if you want. Yeah.
Okay, then we have Philip Sykes' question, which basically is about universities. Most people today are probably appalled by the world information inequality. Most researchers may disapprove of it mildly, but they aren't that worried by it. Even medics aren't appalled by the fact that most of their research won't be available to NHS. How do we get people to be more alive to how appalling information inequality is?
Great question. Well, I think that in that question, there's like a kind of strategic or a high level question and a kind of low level tactical question. So what I mean by that is like, how does systemic change in human societies come about? So I mean, I sometimes use a couple of examples. One in the book is actually about the environmental movement. So if you go back to 1960, 1961, I don't know who here has heard of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. But it was sort of the book that kind of, I mean, obviously things will happen, but launched the modern environmental movement. And people had cared about pollution, or they'd cared about, you know, natural space. You know, there were national parks, but it was sort of a niche topic. And Carson's book was this landmark moment when people were like, oh, well, I'm getting poisoned by DDT. You know, that was part of the story of the book. There was this huge impact on human well-being. But I think there's like you know, even in the 60s, you know, like Greenpeace people were weird. You know, Greenpeace was not mainstream in the 70s. You know, it was like, you know, people who were into environmentalism stuff were a niche group at the beginning. And so you've got the trajectory of any movement is at the beginning, it seems like irrelevant or even a bit ludicrous or like a very minority thing. And then at some point it becomes, you know, mainstream. And, you know, right now that's the case. If, you know, similarly, if I go back to 1970 and I talked about my car being green, you'd have thought I was talking about the color of my car. If you talk about a green car today, like, you know, it means I'm talking about the environmental friendliness of it. That shift is it represents quite a profound shift in our attention and importance in society. So one thing, you know, or you could talk about slavery. You know, at the beginning, if people, and I'm not talking about slavery, like let's like were mainly Quakers, like 17th to 18th century, talking about at the very beginning, they were kind of shunned. They were like, hey, you guys, how come you're going on about, these slavery in the West Indies? What's the problem? People want to ignore it because people don't like thinking about things that aren't, that's sort of discomforting. We don't like talking about climate change for that reason. So one is just at strategic level is accept that there is this trajectory, and that I think that we are moving through that trajectory actually quite rapidly. I think, if you turn and talk to policymakers like governments, politicians, I would say most of them, and I don't mean it critically, they kind of get the digital's different. They're very excited about innovation. Like, oh, wow, I have an app on my smartphone. They don't really understand costless copying. They don't really understand what the implication of costless copying when you combine it with exclusive rights. Now, I would bet money that 20 years from now, every mainstream politician will understand the basic mechanics of the digital age or the information age, and they don't currently. Similarly, so I just would say there's the strategic part, which is you are the vanguard. You need to just keep talking to people. You need to find ways to talk to them in ways that they care about. And it's why I'm talking about inequality today, because I could talk purely about open research, but I found that most people are concerned about, whether they're pro it or against it, they're interested in the rise of Donald Trump. They're interested in a rising inequality. They can see that something's not working in society. And that's a much broader coalition. And then, so that kind of comes into the tactical point, is you need to look at one key thing is we don't want to always, we can shout at people like, how dare you do this? You're so wrong. How come you're publishing in a closed access journal or something? Like, I don't know, whatever it would be. And there's another part of coming from kind of compassion and what do they care about? So, that's the question, whether it's impact, whether it is inequality, whether it is about access to medicine, whatever audience you're speaking to, you've got to find a skillful way to kind of access what they are concerned about. And that's not easy sometimes. But, for example, let's say I wanted to go to talk to pharmaceutical companies who are really interested in having patents and copyright. I would still be saying to them, listen, this could be in your interest. I might not like, I might disapprove of things, people have a lot of judgment about it. Thing is, I'd be saying to them, listen, you have a lot of risk right now. Yeah, your medicines are getting really expensive. There's a lot of protests about the cost of your medicines. It must pain you at night when you see children dying because they can't afford your medicine. Like, I don't believe that's what you really want. You want to get paid and you want the child treated. I have a way that you can do that. I have a way that you can still be paid basically as much money as you're being paid today, and you would stop having to limit access to these medicines in the way you're doing today. You got to find some access if you can. Now, you can't always do that. There's not always that, but that's what I would be emphasizing is what is it they care about that you can speak to? And can you explain the very simple ideas in a very compelling way at the beginning, just to get them intrigued? Like, hey, what's different between a car and a movie? You can ask that at the pub.
Okay, well, I'm really sorry. We do have a couple more interesting questions, but we've just run out of time. And I think we should go. But so thank you very much, Rufus. But we will have to wrap up now. We're a small team and we couldn't have done this without your fantastic support and generosity, Rufus. So thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with all of us. Many thanks to the Wellcome Trust, who through the Institutional Strategic Support Fund awarded to the Faculty of Health and Life Sciences, University of Liverpool, has helped to support this week. Shortly after this session, you will receive a link to the feedback survey. Please share with us what we could do better, what you enjoyed, events that you might like to see, but also if you're interested in becoming a part of the open science community. Open science communities provide a place where newcomers and experienced peers interact, inspire each other to embed open science, which is the same as open research, practices and values in their workflows, provide feedback on policies, infrastructures, and support services. Together working to make open research the norm. So as Professor Hollander announced, we are calling out to researchers and colleagues in particular in our collaborating institutions, University of Liverpool, Liverpool John Moores and Edge Hill University, but also within the northwest of England. And if you're interested, please indicate on the feedback form or contact one of the team directly. As you know, we've recorded all this session, so you should receive a link to the recording within the next 2 weeks. This is the first session of Open Research Week 2021. Later on today, we have Open Research Andorra with Professor Stephen Curry and Open Research Tools and Technology with Dr. Jacob MacDonald. It remains me to say thank you once again to Professor Hollander for officially opening Open Research Week, and to you, Rufus, for your very interesting keynote speech. I'm really sorry we didn't have time to answer any more questions.